April 5th, 1980, a beautiful sunny Saturday. As the city of Toledo, Ohio prepared for Easter Sunday, the nuns of the charitable hospital chapel had started their day early. By 8:20 a.m., after completing their morning prayers, Sister Madeline headed toward the sacristy to discuss that evening's Easter service with Father Gerald Robinson. However, as she reached the door, something was off. The sacristy was locked. This puzzled her deeply. During busy times like this, the sacristy was never locked. It was a sacred but active room, priests and nuns constantly coming in and out to prepare for ceremonies. Madeline retrieved the spare key and slowly opened the door. Inside, in the dim light, she was met with a horrifying scene. The eldest nun of the chapel, Sister Margaret, lay motionless on the floor, completely nude. Years later, Madeline would admit she could never forget what she saw. Sister Margaret's body was contorted in a strange position, her arms outstretched, limbs unnaturally stiff, eyes bloodshot, and her body draped in a white altar cloth. The most disturbing detail? Underneath her body lay a crucifix, as if someone had deliberately staged the scene. The setup resembled a satanic ritual more than anything sacred, and the fact that it occurred inside a Catholic church made the horror all the more chilling. Unlike many mysterious cases, this one unfolded with unexpected speed. In fact, the investigation moved so fast that, before police even arrived, the prime suspect had already been detained. And you are watching the Mystery Cases channel, where we together explore the most mysterious cases, the most thrilling stories. And as usual, before we unravel the mysteries in today's case, please leave a like and a subscribe to support us. Now, let's go back and uncover what really happened to Sister Margaret. Sister Margaret's full name was Margaret Ann Pahl. She was born in a small village near Bonito, Ecuador. Her father was a humble carpenter with 8 children and barely enough income to feed them. Both her parents were devout Roman Catholics, and 2 of her older sisters had joined the local Daughters of Charity. Perhaps inspired by them, Margaret developed a deep desire from a young age to become a nun. She also vowed never to marry, dedicating her entire life to faith and service. She was an excellent student, and with persistent effort, earned a master's degree in literature. Later, she received a nursing certification working at a Catholic hospital. By 1971, at the age of 62, she had technically reached retirement age. However, due to her many years of outstanding service, the hospital's board of directors asked her to stay and take on a new role, coordinating ceremonial and liturgical duties at the chapel. Those who worked with Sister Margaret described her as kind, gentle, and deeply committed to her beliefs. If she had one flaw, it was her strictness about religious protocol. Every ceremony, every altar cloth, every candle, she expected everything to be exact, according to tradition. Initially, this wasn't a problem, but that began to change with the arrival of Father Gerald Robinson. Father Robinson, often referred to as Father Gero, was 30 years younger than Sister Margaret. He was also 30 years newer to the chapel. But because he graduated from an official seminary, he held a higher position in the church's hierarchy. This imbalance created tension. Sister Margaret repeatedly reminded Father Gero about proper ritual procedures. She corrected him when he skipped steps or rushed prayers. To Gero, this was more than annoying. It felt like a challenge to his authority. Over time, his irritation grew. Taking advantage of her old age, hearing loss and fading memory, he often snapped at her, sometimes in front of others. He issued commands with increasing harshness. This deeply hurt Sister Margaret. On April 4th, 1980, one day before the murder, Father Gero ended the Mass early without consulting anyone. This violated the chapel's tradition. Margaret, furious, confronted him after the ceremony. He didn't yell this time. He didn't argue. He just stared at her, cold and silent, before walking away. That night, Sister Margaret was visibly shaken. She confided in a fellow nun named Sister S., asking through tears, "Why would he do this? Why did he cut the ceremony short?" They weren't particularly close, but even Sister S. was moved by Margaret's pain. She had no words, only silent sympathy. Despite the inner turmoil from the night before, Sister Margaret showed no outward signs of distress on the morning of April 5th, 1980. As always, she woke up at 5:30 a.m. sharp, dressed in her traditional nun's habit, and began her daily routine. At 6 a.m., she was seen in the dining hall eating her usual breakfast, a small bowl of oatmeal with raisins and a cup of coffee. That day was also her 71st birthday, but she had no plans to celebrate. At 6:50 a.m., she left the dining hall and walked toward the chapel. She would be found dead just 30 minutes later. Around 7:30 a.m., a few nuns reported hearing heavy, hurried footsteps from the second floor of the chapel. According to the doorman, Walter Langston, the sound was unusually loud, almost like something urgent had happened. Other witnesses noted that the footsteps seemed to come from Father Gerald's quarters, moving quickly down the hallway toward the west wing. Then silence. Minutes later, Sister Madeline discovered Margaret's body in the sacristy. The police were called. Because of the disturbing nature of the scene, nudity, ritual positioning, and a crucifix beneath the body, many feared it was a satanic killing. Naturally, suspicion fell on Father Gerald Robinson. Police began a search of his room, and what they found confirmed their fears. Inside a drawer, they discovered a letter opener knife, stained with dark red traces that matched the crime scene. He was immediately brought in for questioning, but Robinson denied everything. In fact, he tried to divert suspicion by telling police that someone had come to the church's confessional after the murder and confessed to killing Sister Margaret. But when asked to describe the person, he stuttered and finally admitted he had made up the entire story. At this point, you might think Father Gerald Robinson would finally confess. But the truth was far more complicated and far more disturbing. Father Gerald, as he was known, came from a Polish immigrant family. In Toledo at that time, the Polish-American Catholic community was tight-knit, deeply religious, and highly influential. When news broke of the murder and his arrest, the community was outraged, but not at the crime. They were furious that their priest had been accused. Dozens of Polish Americans came forward in support of Father Gerald, insisting that he was innocent. Even more troubling was the fact that Toledo's law enforcement had strong religious ties. Many officers, including the deputy chief of police, were devout Catholics. The deputy chief, known only as Quinn, refused to believe Robinson was guilty. His reasoning? Father Robinson was chosen by God, recognized by the Pope. He couldn't have done this. And it didn't stop there. At that time in the United States, there was an unspoken rule. If a priest was suspected of a serious crime, police had to inform the local bishop and let the church handle it. So even though investigators had already collected strong evidence, including the blood-stained letter opener, the deputy chief ordered them to pause everything. All case files were confiscated and sealed. Soon after, Archbishop Jerome Smye of the Toledo Diocese arrived at the police station, accompanied by a lawyer and two priests. One officer, Bill, objected, asking, "Where are you taking him?" The reply, "To a psychiatric hospital." But Robinson was never admitted anywhere. According to official church records, he was relieved of duty but remained on the payroll of the Toledo Diocese. He disappeared from public view, only to resurface years later working as a part-time priest at a private nursing home. Years passed. The case faded from public memory. But in 2003, a woman named Anna Louise, 29 years old, stepped forward. She was a survivor of clerical abuse and a member of an organization called the Survivors Network. Her testimony shocked even seasoned detectives. Anna described horrific childhood memories of being abused by clergy in Toledo. She remembered being taken to a remote cemetery, locked in a coffin, surrounded by insects, told by a priest that she would be reborn as a servant of Satan. She had repressed most of her trauma, but now the memories came flooding back. And one of the priests who had harmed her? Father Gerald Robinson. She didn't know anything about the murder of Sister Margaret, but during her statement she suddenly asked, "Were there upside-down crosses on the body?" That question stunned investigators. They had never released that detail to the public. They returned to the old evidence, specifically the altar cloth found wrapped around Margaret's body. Upon closer inspection, they discovered 18 precise cuts, forming a perfect upside-down cross. It was undeniable. The murder wasn't just personal, it was ritualistic. In April 2004, Father Robinson was rearrested. A search of his home revealed hundreds of photographs of women, most taken years earlier. Some were more recent. It suggested one thing: Margaret wasn't his only victim. But just as the investigation gained momentum, the church stepped in again. Catholics rallied. Polish Americans organized massive protests, demanding his release. Donations poured in to cover bail. Despite the police insisting the arrest was legal, Robinson was released. Still, the truth couldn't be buried again. Police now had real evidence. They even exhumed Sister Margaret's remains, hiring forensic experts to reconstruct the crime. On April 24, 2006, the trial of Father Gerald Robinson officially began. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled by hospital chapel staff, Catholic officials, media, and even Officer Bill, the man who had once tried to stop Robinson from being taken away years earlier. The defense was strong. Backed by the diocese, the Polish community, and former officers who had protected Robinson, they argued that he had no motive. He had status, security, and no criminal record. Why would he commit such a terrible act? But the prosecution was ready. 3 witnesses testified they saw Robinson near the chapel the morning of the murder. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. The letter opener, the cloth with the upside-down cross, the lack of forced entry, the ritualistic positioning of the body. There was no doubt Margaret knew her attacker. She didn't fight back. Likely she never expected danger from a priest. The prosecutors gave 3 reasons for Robinson's actions: long-standing conflict with Sister Margaret, frustration over being denied promotion within the church, a deep psychological and spiritual crisis, culminating in a ritual meant to release years of buried anger. When the final arguments ended, the room fell silent. Even the Polish community, once Robinson's fiercest defenders, began to see something cold in his eyes, something that didn't match the man they had once revered. On May 11, 2006, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of murder. Father Gerald Robinson was sentenced to 15 years in prison. As the judge brought down the gavel, Robinson, who had remained calm throughout, suddenly looked shattered. Tears streamed down his face. As he was escorted away in handcuffs, he whispered, "Jesus, sister, please, don't come for me, please, don't come for me." Even evil fears the things it's done. Though the trial had ended, the questions hadn't. Who else was involved? What was the organization behind Robinson? How many victims were there? No one had answers. To this day, Robinson's motives remain partially buried beneath religious politics, institutional cover-ups, and decades of silence. This case was only the second time in U.S. history that a Catholic priest was convicted of murder. The first was Father Hans Schmidt, executed in 1916. In prison, Robinson rarely spoke. He never admitted guilt. Some say he read the Bible daily. Others say he sat alone in silence, drawing strange symbols in a journal no one was allowed to see. In May 2014, Robinson suffered a severe heart attack. He was transferred to Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, a facility for terminal inmates. There, on July 4, 2014, he died. No visitors, no confessions, no final words, except what was caught on tape after sentencing years earlier. "Jesus, sister, please, don't come for me." His life ended just as his secrets had lived, in shadows. So the case today ends here. What do you think about this case? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below to discuss further. And before you leave, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next classic cases on the Mystery Cases channel.